and commit no further offence, or else you will be liable to serve a further period in custody. You may go down.
यानी इस तरह के क्या इससे होगा क्या मुझे तो अभी ये नहीं समझ आ रही क्या ये बच जाएंगे ये क्या ये लोग इन चोरों को वोट देंगे अगर आप लोगों के मुंह बंद कर दें क्या हमें जो डराया धमकाया जा रहा है और ये जो हर रोज नई एफआईआर क्या इससे हम पीछे
For the gross negligence manslaughter of Kaylee Titford, having regard to your guilty plea, I sentence you to 6 years imprisonment. You will serve 2/3 of the sentence, namely 4 years in custody, before you are released on licence. When you are released, you will be on licence until the end of your sentence. You must comply with the terms of the licence and commit no further offence, or else you will be liable to serve a further period in custody. You may go down.
लेकिन उससे कोई डरा नहीं है लोगों का हर शहर में और ज्यादा लोग तैयार हो गए जेल में
The judge there in court handing down sentencing to Alan Titford and his wife Sarah Lloyd-Jones after the death of their daughter Kaylee Titford. Alan Titford was sentenced to 7 years and 6 months. His wife, 6 years. Let's bring in Becky Cottrell, our correspondent who's been following this case and joins us live now from Swansea. Becky, those are sentencing and the judge summing up just the harrowing detail of this case and the hideous end to poor Kaylee's life.
Yeah, it really has been a day of truly gruesome details about what Kaylee Titford went through at the end of her life. She was a 16-year-old girl. She had spina bifida, which meant she didn't have the use of her legs. But up until lockdown because of the pandemic, she'd been going to school, she'd been getting about in her wheelchair. But then after the lockdown, she didn't return to school, and it is at that point that she gained a significant amount of weight and became morbidly obese and bedbound. But it is what her parents did during that time that was the focus of today's sentencing. Essentially, they failed to take care of Kaylee, and she ended up dying in October 2020 from complications because of her obesity and because she hadn't been cared for properly. And today, the prosecution went over some of the details that the first responders, the paramedics and the police had laid out from discovering Kaylee's body that day. They described an awful stench. She had ulcers, particularly bad on the lower half of her body. In some cases, the ulcers were so deep that the fat and the bone were visible beneath. There were plastic bottles filled with her urine strewn about the room, incontinence pad that had been left underneath her that were saturated with her bodily fluids, and perhaps most disturbing of all, maggots on the bed that had been feeding on her rotting flesh. Now, as you just heard, both parents found guilty today of gross negligence manslaughter. Kaylee's mother, Sarah Lloyd-Jones, had initially pled guilty, but her father, Alan Titford, hadn't, and it had gone to trial where he was then found guilty. He had claimed that Kaylee's care had been the responsibility of her mother, that when she had reached puberty, he pulled back on her care, and he hadn't known just how bad her condition had got. Now, the judge was not satisfied with that. He said that both parents were equally responsible for Kaylee's care. He was also very critical of them for having missed medical appointments and for not having reached out for help for Kaylee's condition. He said that help was on offer, but that offer was neglected. Now, Kaylee's parents, both of them, had argued that they had been depressed. Kaylee's mother, Sarah Lloyd-Jones, said that she had been overwhelmed. She was a parent to 6 children. She also was working part-time as a carer. The judge was not satisfied that that was a sufficient excuse for having let Kaylee's condition deteriorate to where it was at when she ultimately died that day. Now, today in court, there were members of the family. They were crying, very emotional. Kaylee's mother, Sarah Lloyd-Jones, sat very solemnly throughout the sentencing today, staring ahead. Alan Titford had his head bowed for most of it. He did, however, shake his head, and the prosecution said that he was equally as responsible for Kaylee's death. His lawyers had said that he had shown significant remorse since the trial. The judge did not accept that either parent had shown enough remorse for that to be considered a mitigating factor. It seems he did consider the fact that Sarah Lloyd-Jones had pleaded guilty as a sufficient mitigating factor for her to receive a slightly shorter sentence than Alan Titford. Both parents were out on bail up until today's sentencing, and now, of course, they will begin their prison sentences.
OK, Becky Cottrell there in Swansea, thank you very much. The father of Kaylee Titford today sentenced to 7 years and 6 months in prison. The mother of Kaylee Titford sentenced to 6 years. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has rejected claims that he ignored expert advice on coronavirus testing in care homes at the start of the pandemic. WhatsApp messages leaked to the Daily Telegraph suggest that Mr Hancock was told there should be testing for all people going into care homes. But the messages suggest he rejected that advice, instead introducing mandatory testing only for residents coming from hospitals. Mr Hancock has said it is outrageous that this distorted account of the pandemic is being pushed. But his claims about Hancock wrote on the 14th of April, Chris Whitty has done an evidence review and now recommends testing of all going into care homes and segregation whilst awaiting results. This is obviously a good positive step and we must put it into the dock. The Special Advisor, Alan Nixon, replied, "I wasn't in testing meeting, just to check. Officials are saying your steer is to remove the commitment to testing on admission to care homes from the community, but keep commitment to testing admission to care homes from hospitals. Is that right?" To which Matt Hancock replied, "Fine. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I would rather leave it out and just commit to test and isolate all going into care from hospital. I do not think the community commitment adds anything and it muddies the waters." Have that for a Q&A response. Speaking during Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak said the official coronavirus inquiry is the right way to investigate ministers' conduct during the pandemic, after he was challenged by Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer.
Mr Speaker, I don't want to finish this session without asking about the COVID disclosures in today's Daily Telegraph. Now, we don't know the truth of what happened yet. There are too many messages and too many unknowns. Oh, but families across the country will look at this and the sight of politicians writing books, portraying themselves as heroes or selectively leaking messages will be insulting and ghoulish spectacle for them. At the heart of this is every family who made enormous sacrifices for the good of the country or who tragically lost loved ones. The country deserves better. The COVID inquiry has already cost the taxpayer £85 million and hasn't heard from a single government minister yet. So can the Prime Minister assure the House no more delays, that the inquiry will have whatever support it needs to report by the end of this year?
Well, Mr Speaker, the last couple of years were an incredibly difficult one for everyone involved in the health service, and I pay tribute to all their hard work, and I know the House will join me in that regard. And now, rather than comment on piecemeal bits of information, I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman will agree with me, the right way for these things to be looked at is the COVID inquiry. That's why we've established the COVID inquiry, and he will know, as he has mentioned it one or two times before that he was a lawyer in a previous life, that there is a proper process to these things. It is an independent inquiry. It has the resources it needs. It has the powers it needs. And what we should all do in this House is let them get on and do their job.
Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who's standing by in Westminster. And John, this first lot of leaked messages